The White House briefing room buzzed with anticipation. The daily press conference was moments away, and reporters from all the major networks jockeyed for position, eager to pepper the new White House press secretary with questions. At just 30 years old, Karoline Leavitt was already a rising conservative star. Articulate, unapologetic, and fiercely loyal to President Donald Trump, she had quickly become a favorite among supporters and a lightning rod for critics. That day, Karoline wore a simple, elegant navy blazer, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed. Around her neck was a delicate gold cross necklace, small but unmistakable. It was the same one she'd worn since her high school graduation, a gift from her grandmother, who used to say, "Never be ashamed to show who you belong to." As she stepped up to the podium, the room quieted. Cameras clicked. Microphones tilted forward. And then, like always, the opening salvo came from Lena Walker, a journalist with a reputation for needling the administration on social issues. Lena was known for her progressive takes and viral TikToks criticizing conservative figures. "Ms. Leavitt," Lena said, her voice laced with a tone of feigned curiosity, "before we dive into policy, may I ask, you've been wearing that gold cross necklace quite prominently. Can you explain what message you're trying to send by displaying a religious symbol in a public government setting?" A few heads turned. The question was odd even for Lena. A murmur rippled through the room. Karoline smiled politely, unfazed. "It's not about sending a message, Lena," she replied calmly. "It's a personal item that has deep meaning to me." But Lena didn't stop. "Yes, but don't you think wearing a Christian cross at official press briefings could be seen as a violation of the separation of church and state? Especially when representing a president who has drawn criticism for blurring those lines?" Karoline raised an eyebrow. The press room grew tense. A few journalists fidgeted, sensing something brewing. "I appreciate the concern," Karoline said evenly, "but my necklace isn't a government policy. It's my First Amendment right. Freedom of religion, remember? Or do we only support that when it's convenient?" Lena flushed slightly but pressed on. "But by wearing it so visibly while standing at the White House podium, aren't you endorsing Christianity as the official faith of the administration?" Now the tension was palpable. Karoline's eyes narrowed slightly. "Let me be clear," she said, leaning slightly forward, "this cross represents my faith, my family, and the values that guide me. It's not a government declaration. And it's certainly not an apology." A few reporters lowered their eyes. Even some of Lena's usual allies looked uncomfortable. The air was charged, not just with political tension, but with something deeper. This wasn't just about policy. It was about identity. Still, Lena wasn't finished. "So you're saying your personal religious symbols have no bearing on the administration's decisions?" Karoline gave a small, knowing smile. "What I'm saying," she replied, "is that faith doesn't belong in a closet. If you want to criticize a piece of legislation, go ahead. But if your issue is with me wearing a piece of jewelry that's older than most of the TikTok trends you post, maybe the problem isn't with me, it's with your comfort level seeing a confident woman of faith standing at this podium." There was silence. And then, unexpectedly, a few muffled claps from the back of the room. Karoline straightened, eyes locked on Lena. "Next question." The room shifted. The balance of power had tipped. By the time the briefing ended, Karoline Leavitt had not only addressed the policy questions for the day with poise, but had also become the center of a brewing media storm. Within hours, clips of her response to Lena Walker's line of questioning about the gold cross necklace went viral. Conservative commentators hailed it as a mic drop moment for religious freedom, while left-leaning voices were already dissecting every word she said, accusing her of dog-whistling to the far right. On social media, the hashtag #Crossgate trended, with both supporters and detractors weighing in. Karoline Leavitt showed what it means to stand your ground with grace. "A true patriot," tweeted a conservative mama. "This isn't about religion. It's about inappropriate symbolism from a government official. We're a secular nation," countered at Blue Voices Unite. That night, Karoline sat in her modest D.C. apartment, sipping chamomile tea as she scrolled through the online reaction. The flood of messages ranged from hate mail to heartfelt support. One email stood out, a note from a retired Army chaplain in Ohio. "Ms. Leavitt, I've served this country under 5 presidents. I've counseled soldiers of every faith, and none. What you did today was bold. You reminded the country that the Constitution protects all beliefs, including yours. Don't stop." She blinked, moved. Not because she needed the validation, but because it reminded her why she took this job in the first place. The attacks weren't new. But what had started as a jab at her necklace was quickly morphing into something deeper, an attempt to make an example of her. To shame her for her values. By morning, the next phase of the media frenzy had kicked in. On Good Morning America, a roundtable was already dissecting the incident. Should public officials leave their religious symbols at home? The host asked. It's about maintaining neutrality, said a media analyst. But where does it end? Countered a conservative guest. Should she remove a Star of David? A hijab? A turban? This is religious freedom under attack. Meanwhile, Lena Walker was doing interviews, positioning herself as the one asking hard questions in the name of journalistic accountability. Karoline, however, refused to engage in media battles. Instead, she scheduled an impromptu follow-up press briefing for that afternoon. The press room was even more packed than the day before. Everyone was expecting fireworks, and Karoline didn't disappoint. She stepped up to the podium, once again wearing the gold cross, its simple shine reflecting the flashbulbs aimed at her. I understand there's been a lot of discussion about what I wear around my neck, she began. So let me make a few things crystal clear, not just for the press, but for the American people. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. This necklace doesn't represent an agenda. It doesn't dictate policy. And it certainly doesn't violate the Constitution. You know what it does do? It reminds me that there is something greater than power, greater than politics. And for millions of Americans of faith, whether they wear crosses, crescents, or kippas, that's not something to be hidden. It's something to be proud of. Reporters scribbled furiously. The room was silent, save for the sound of rapid tapping on keyboards. Karoline continued, her tone unwavering. There's a reason our founders enshrined freedom of religion in the First Amendment, not freedom from religion. No government should impose a faith on its people, and no government should silence people because of their faith. The crowd was still. And if my necklace bothers you more than rising crime, open borders, or economic instability, maybe you need to reevaluate your priorities. With that, she gave a small nod and stepped away from the podium. This time, the applause was louder, and it wasn't just from the back row. That evening, the buzz around Karoline's second press briefing hit an all-time high. News outlets couldn't get enough. Her face was on every major cable network, her quotes were circulating in viral reels, and think pieces were pouring in from both sides of the political aisle. Fox News labeled her speech a masterclass in grace under fire. MSNBC, on the other hand, ran a segment titled Religious Symbolism or Political Theater? But the most talked about moment came not from a press room, but from a primetime interview that night on a popular independent podcast, The American Pulse, hosted by former Navy SEAL and political independent Mike Barnes. The decision to appear on Mike's show was strategic. He wasn't tied to either political camp and had a massive online following among independents and moderates. The set was minimal. 2 leather chairs, a U.S. flag in the background, and just 2 people sitting down to talk, no scripts, no spin. So, Karoline, Mike began, you've had one heck of a week. Want to tell us what's going through your mind right now? Karoline smiled lightly, honestly? I'm wondering how wearing a necklace somehow became more controversial than the fentanyl crisis. Mike laughed. Fair. But you know what's coming next. Let's talk about Lena Walker's question. Do you think she had a legitimate concern? Karoline took a breath. Look, I respect journalism. I grew up watching press briefings and admiring the tough questions. But what Lena did wasn't about accountability, it was about trying to paint a narrative. She didn't ask about inflation, foreign policy, or border security. She fixated on a gold cross. She leaned forward. And that tells me something. It tells me we're living in a time where symbolism is treated like policy and actual policies are ignored if they don't fit a political agenda. Mike nodded thoughtfully. You said something during the second briefing that really stuck with people. You said faith doesn't belong in a closet. That struck a nerve, both positive and negative. Want to expand on that? Karoline looked straight into the camera. Sure. Here's what I mean. If you're a person of faith in public service, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Sikh, whatever, you shouldn't have to hide who you are to be acceptable in government. That's not inclusion. That's selective tolerance. She paused, then added, and the same people who preach diversity often forget that diversity includes faith, too. The comments section exploded with support. Wow, this woman is fire. I'm an atheist and I still respect how she stood her ground. Finally, someone who talks common sense with class. Mike leaned back, visibly impressed. You just said something that a lot of people are too scared to say. Karoline gave a knowing smile. I don't do this job to be liked. I do it because I believe in truth, accountability, and defending the Constitution even when it's not popular. Mike's final question caught her slightly off guard. Do you ever regret stepping into this fire? The spotlight, the scrutiny, even attacks about your necklace. Karoline paused, visibly emotional for the first time that evening. You know, my grandmother gave me this necklace. She was a lunch lady in New Hampshire. Never went to college. Never asked for much. But she told me once, Karoline, if you ever get to speak for people, don't whisper. A beat. So no, I don't regret it. Because I'm not whispering. The next morning, that quote would be printed on t-shirts, turned into memes, and even made into bumper stickers. If you ever get to speak for people, don't whisper. Karoline Leavitt. The battle had begun with a question about a cross, but by now it was about far more. It was about who had the right to speak, to believe, and to be heard. By the time Friday rolled around, Karoline Leavitt had become more than the White House press secretary. She was a national symbol of something deeper. For some, she was a brave defender of religious liberty and unapologetic American values. For others, she was a threat to secular governance and a symbol of political grandstanding. The divide was palpable. On Capitol Hill, the reactions mirrored the country's mood. Republican lawmakers were lining up behind Karoline. Senator Josh Hawley tweeted, "Karoline Leavitt is exactly the kind of strong, principled leadership we need. Faith isn't a threat to democracy, it's a part of it." Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene posted a selfie wearing a large cross necklace with the hashtag Stand with Karoline. On the other side, liberal lawmakers and activists began a coordinated campaign questioning whether Karoline's comments violated the principle of separation of church and state. A group of progressive Democrats even sent a letter to the Office of Government Ethics requesting a review of the increasing religious overtones in White House communications. Karoline, however, didn't flinch. Behind the scenes, President Trump called her into the Oval Office. The media expected fireworks. Instead, they got a photo of the two smiling, the gold cross subtly visible around her neck. "You're a fighter," Trump said. "We need more of that. They'll come after you hard now. You ready?" Karoline didn't hesitate. "I didn't sign up for comfort. I signed up to represent Americans who feel unheard." Meanwhile, Lena Walker, the reporter who had first brought up the necklace, was facing her own storm. Critics accused her of religious bias. Her inbox was flooded. She appeared on CNN's reliable sources to defend herself. "I asked a valid question," Lena insisted. "When a government official wears a symbol of religion, it's not unfair to ask what message that sends. I wasn't attacking her faith, I was seeking clarity." But many Americans weren't buying it. Outside the White House, crowds began gathering, not in protest, but in support. People from across the country, truckers from Texas, pastors from Georgia, nurses from Ohio, stood shoulder to shoulder holding signs that read, "Faith is not offensive. Freedom of religion still matters. Karoline speaks for me." One woman, a young mom named Claire from Wisconsin, told a reporter, "I've never felt represented in politics before. But when Karoline stood up there and said she wouldn't hide her faith, I felt seen." And then came the unexpected twist. Karoline received an invitation to speak at Georgetown University, a liberal campus known for its spirited debates. The invitation came from a student-led group, Voices of Liberty, who wanted her to speak on faith, politics, and the First Amendment. Her team hesitated. "They'll be hostile. This could backfire." But Karoline was calm. "I'm going." The auditorium was packed. Protesters lined the sidewalks outside. Inside, the tension was thick as she walked on stage. She opened with no notes. "I'm not here to convert you. I'm not here to shame you. I'm here because I believe we can still have conversations in this country, real ones. Ones where we don't cancel each other over a necklace." The crowd was skeptical, but they listened. "The Constitution protects your right to disagree with me, but it also protects my right to wear this necklace, to speak my beliefs, and to serve this nation with integrity." She spoke for 45 minutes, fielding tough questions. Some fair, some loaded, and never once raised her voice. By the end, even some of the most critical students admitted she had handled herself with grace. A senior political science major told the campus paper, "I still don't agree with her politics, but I can't deny she was impressive. She listened. She didn't back down. That's rare." The next week, America was still buzzing from Karoline Leavitt's speech at Georgetown. Cable news continued to cover it. Clips from her Q&A with students topped YouTube's trending list. Even late-night comedians reluctantly admitted she held her own. But it was the impact beyond politics that truly revealed the weight of what had happened. A viral TikTok featured a young woman crying in her car, holding a small gold cross. "I've always been afraid to wear this at work, not anymore. Thank you, Karoline." Churches across the country played clips of Karoline's press briefing and university speech. In small towns and major cities alike, discussions broke out in schools, office break rooms, and dining tables about the meaning of faith in public life and whether the American experiment still had room for it. Meanwhile, Lena Walker, the reporter who had ignited the firestorm, had gone silent. Her network had placed her on temporary leave for safety concerns after receiving threats which Karoline herself publicly condemned. During a follow-up briefing, Karoline addressed it head-on. Let me be clear, threats and harassment have no place in this country. We may disagree passionately, but no one deserves to feel unsafe for doing their job. The moment was universally praised. Even her critics had to acknowledge her poise and leadership. But perhaps the most powerful moment came in an unexpected way. 2 weeks later, Karoline was invited to speak at the National Prayer Breakfast, a long-standing tradition in Washington where political rivals sit side by side to reflect on shared values. The hall was filled with senators, presidents, diplomats, and faith leaders. And all eyes were on Karoline as she approached the podium wearing her now famous gold cross necklace. She began softly. I've been called many things these past few weeks: hero, villain, threat, inspiration. But none of that matters to me nearly as much as what one elderly woman in Iowa wrote me in a letter: thank you for not being ashamed to stand up. She held up the letter. This woman lost her son in Afghanistan. She said he died wearing a cross just like mine. And she told me that seeing it around my neck during that press briefing made her feel like he hadn't been forgotten. The room went still. Karoline continued, her voice steady. We live in a country where faith built bridges, not barriers. Where Martin Luther King Jr. could stand in front of the Lincoln Memorial and proclaim that justice rolls down like waters and no one stopped to ask if quoting scripture was too religious. That's the America I believe in. Not an America where faith is forced, but one where it is freely lived. Applause erupted. Not just polite claps, but a standing ovation from both sides of the aisle. Even Lena Walker, watching from home, reportedly teared up. In the weeks that followed, something shifted. The outrage cycle died down. The media moved on. But the story of the cross necklace stayed lodged in the American conscience, not because it was about jewelry, but because it symbolized a bigger truth. Karoline Leavitt had not destroyed her critics with anger. She had dismantled them with grace, clarity, and conviction. She had proven that strength didn't require shouting, that belief didn't equal bigotry, and that one young woman, standing alone with faith and facts, could shake a nation to its core. And as she stood outside the White House one spring morning, talking quietly with a group of visiting school kids, one of them pointed at her necklace and asked, "Is that the one?" Karoline smiled and nodded. "It is." The little girl grinned. "I want to wear one like that someday." And in that small moment, beyond politics, beyond headlines, Karoline knew she had already won.